well, actually, your question was, is a focusing oriented therapist more able to create the relational freedom in therapy such that the client is more aware of things that can't be said and can more easily say the unsayable things. And I think I'm not going to start with a comparison of focusing oriented therapy and other therapies, but more that whole idea, which brings us into what is the basic rudimentary project of therapy. And that is what Donald Stern calls formulating unformulated experience. What enables us to think further? What enables us to come alive? What enables us to have a new experience? People wrote about it. They wrote about what was working and alive as the word really. The person is really engaged, or really talking about something, or really there. And what word he summed up as not working is merely. The client is merely reporting. The client is merely thinking about this or that, or merely talking about it. And I just love that, the whole difference between everything being really and merely. So what is it that makes the really, that engagement that matters? Something is happening, and it doesn't happen all the time, right? It doesn't happen in our class all the time, or in our therapies all the time, or in any of our relationships all the time. But what is it that makes it happen when it happens? And the question about that Donald Stern helps us to think about is what prevents it from happening. What prevents us from engaging, from thinking newly, from formulating the more in our minds, becoming really engaged, becoming connected to the other, having a feeling of possibility, what Donald Stern calls a feeling of tendency, which I love, that feeling in your body of something coming, something calling you, something almost there. It's an actual bodily experience, isn't it? To have that feeling of coming alive in relation to thinking, in relation to the other, in relation. When I say thinking, I'm not talking about thinking as opposed to feeling, of course. We all know that intellectually, but then we forget about it, just like I forget how to say Jonda's name, right? We know that, but we forget it and say it automatically. We juxtapose thinking and feeling. So bringing our thinking alive is also bringing our feeling alive. And some people move, come alive on the edge of the thinking part of the integration, and some people on the emotional, bodily part. And we can't really divide those, but our culture has divided them. So the question of the difference between merely and really. So I think of my little way of capturing that is therapy making the unsayable sayable, the unthinkable thinkable, the unbearable bearable, the undoable doable. And I know I've said that to you before, but take it in again for a minute. What is it that makes the unsayable sayable and the unthinkable thinkable? It's so magical, isn't it? And when we think about that, some kinds of therapies emphasize guiding people to allow the unthinkable room to be thinkable. And many of the movements in focusing are like that, guiding. Other therapies are emphasizing being in such a way that makes the unthinkable thinkable. And again, the quote of Jean that our main job as therapists is to be the interaction that makes for change. When I was in college, I was in a sort of conservative college, and some of the authoritarian teachers in the college were very repressive in terms of what you were allowed to say or to think or to write. And my best friend, who was from England, gave this administrator the most wonderful insult I've ever heard, and did it in this very very ladylike kind of way. And he was, sort of yelling at us or scolding us for saying something or doing something, I forget what. And she looked at him and she said, your presence precludes a serious conversation. And this guy was so like, what? It was like the whole conversation just stopped and everybody looked at each other. And I think he walked away. But I felt so amazed that she could say that and that she could do it with such equanimity. And as through my lifetime, I never forgot that little moment. And I thought, not only was she very brave to say that, but it was also amazingly wise. And it's very much what we're talking about. What Jean is talking about. We want to have the kind of presence that fosters a serious, lively conversation. And it's very anti-therapeutic when we have the kind of presence that precludes a serious conversation. And that's often a way of gauging how are we doing together? And it's not just the presence of the therapist, of course. It's the way that the presence of the therapist and the presence of the client are working together. What are we precluding? And what are we allowing? What are we fostering in our way of being with the client? When are we enabling it to be a really present conversation? And when are we going through the motions of something? Or when are we even more usual, sort of not aware of what our presence is doing, that we think we're investigating something, but we're really defending ourselves, or we think we're trying to protect the client from behavior that isn't safe, but really we're reining them in. I think that Richard Geist, several of you said it was a difficult paper to read. He was sort of exploding things just to get our attention, saying, oh, you think this is therapy? This is what Kohut really meant, which of course Kohut would have behaved very, very differently if the client. And started getting undressed in front of him. But Richard Geist is saying, let's really look at what we're doing. What are we doing? We can just safely say, oh, I'm drawing boundaries, or I'm investigating, or I'm the one that always I get a flinch when people say I'm what is the phrase? Psychosocial education. I'm providing psychosocial education. And I know that can mean many things to people, but what it means to me when I hear that is that the therapist thinks that they're the experts on what's reality and what's normal, and they're educating the person into thinking the way they think, and that's going to make the person better. And I always have this ooh kind of feeling about it. But I'm sure that I'm not understanding it the way those people mean it when they're saying it. It's just my association to it. But really examining what all of those things mean is very important. What do we mean by thinking? What do we mean by felt sense, really? What do we mean by body? What do we mean by memory? What do we mean by closeness? All of these things are taken for granted at some point, and we have to open them up newly again and say, you know, what is this? So let's start with opening up what we mean by thinking. It's not juxtaposed to feeling. It's a thinking, feeling process. And we recognize through Gene Shandlin and through the relationalists, it isn't something that one person does, right? It's not, I think this. I may have formulated this and it's on my shelf there, but I've formulated it along with my culture, along with my inner people, along with my values, along with my roles in society, along with so many things we think within an interaction, Jean says. It's not that I think this and you think that. And what I think is either made possible by you, or it may be made impossible by you. One of the articles that we read of Jean's might have been in the interview that we keep circling back to. But in one of the articles, he talks about how with certain people, he'll take a kind of nascent coming into being idea that he has, and he'll be so eager to talk to that person about it, because he knows when he talks to that person about it, it will be more. It will come alive. There'll be things that he couldn't think by himself that he can think with that person. And then there'll be other people that might even ask him about the idea, and something in him will go, I don't want to get into it. And that's really awful in therapy, isn't it? When the therapist asks you something and you feel inside like, I don't want to get into it. And then there are the neutral people too, like you could get into it or not get into it. It either makes the more, precludes the more, or it's sort of neutral to the more, and you can do it, but it doesn't spark you. So maybe I'll give you a moment to think for a second about how that is for you. Something that you want to investigate or understand better or open up. It could be an idea, it could be a feeling, it could be a circumstance, it could be an article that you're struggling with, a decision. And just think for a minute, feel, get the feeling, thinking process that's there, that's unformulated. Who, think of a particular thing and then who you would want to talk about it with. Who you would look forward to seeing. Oh, I can't wait to tell you about such and such. See if you can just imagine that. And then think to yourself, what person would I sort of have that, I don't want to talk to them about it. See if you could get the felt sense of the wanting to talk about it and the felt sense of not wanting to talk about it. Would you get that sense of that? Just see if you could describe not the content, but the difference in that feeling. What makes the feeling of wanting to talk about it? What is it in this person or in your way of being with them, your interaction with them, that makes you want to talk about it? And what in the interaction with the person that you don't want to talk about it, what makes that? Can you describe that? We don't want to discuss this too long, so we don't want to get into too much detail, but just see if you can find that feeling and tell us some of the felt sense words of it.
I have 2 words that
Okay.
describe each one of them. One, if I don't want to talk about it, the feeling is of constriction. I won't be received, so something in me gets constricted. And when I do want to talk about it, the feeling is of something coming alive, of something in me being seen and having the right to be.
Yes, yes. Being seen, having the right to be. Yeah.
I can say that when I want to talk about it, it's kind of an energetic excitement.
Mm-hmm.
And when I don't, a sense of intellectual dissection.
What makes the energetic excitement? What about that person or situation gives you that?
My experience of what I'm sharing is going to go further in that exchange with them. It's going to open up more to both of us.
Oh, that it's That's another part, right? That it's going to open up something for the other person.
And within me too, that
Yes.
it'll expand my sense of what I've just said.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting when we think about therapy that if I only think about it will open up something for me to talk about it with my therapist. That's one thing. But the other aspect is it's going to open up something for the therapist. Therapist is going to be learning something new or excited about it or thinking something that he or she didn't think before. And with NATIs, the therapist will see me. If the therapist sees me, then I can see myself newly.
The words that came to me resulted in my remembering an organization I worked with that worked with artists called the Trust for Mutual Understanding. And that strikes me, that the person I most want to speak with, we would have mutual understanding and acceptance.
Yes. Yeah. Mutual understanding and acceptance.
I think of the person I want to help. I have a sense that there's a resonance and an interest, and I kind of excited about what we're sharing together. I don't want to talk to someone. I'm realizing that it's someone who just wouldn't take it in a way that would be, it wouldn't have those characteristics of interest and excitement and resonance. It just falls kind of,
Yeah. Yeah, Liz.
I had a weird feeling. First, I had the regular kind of why I would want to talk to somebody and why I wouldn't want to talk to somebody. And then I got another layer that was a little frightening to me. It was only he would understand. And then the converse of, I don't want to talk to that one because he's like all the rest won't understand. So it left me with a kind of lonely feeling that it has to be so selective.
Yeah. In psychoanalytic terms, we would say that that we want to talk to people that can meet our self-object needs, our needs for connectedness, and that's very, very specific. And there's very, very, very specific kinds of needs that we have for connectedness with people, all different kinds. And we might want to talk to one person about one thing and not talk to them about something else. And then somebody else, that's the person I want to talk to about that, because they'll somehow see it and feel it. So if we about unformulated experience, well, let's just go back a minute to this idea of thinking as formulating unformulated experience, right? Unformulated experience being this inkling we have of something, this feeling of tendency, it's not unconscious completely, but it's not conscious. It's the felt sense of something. We know there's something there, but we don't quite know what it is. As a kind of vagueness, a kind of murky edge that he talks about, that kind of edge of awareness where it's just wanting to come over the horizon line of being able to think it or speak it, being able to bear it, to do it. And what brings that over the horizon line and what precludes it from going there? What makes it fall flat? And one of the things that well, a way that we could say it in categories, which may not be that helpful, but I'll throw them out. One of the things is that, well, actually, I think this is really, I'd like to have you focus on this for a second. We often can't think things that will threaten the bond with people. Incest, for example, in families is unthinkable, unrecognizable, because it would threaten the whole system. Certain kinds of societal issues are unthinkable because they threaten to upset the apple cart. Certain ways of thinking and being within a close relationship or a very distant relationship. You just can't say those things. You can't think those things. I think I had mentioned to you that I sometimes ask, and maybe I'll ask you now, what couldn't you say to your therapist? It might be just a simple little thing, like, you know, I hate your shoes. Or not that you need to say everything, but it's significant when you can kind of take a minute and say, well, what could I never have said, especially in a past therapy relationship? Maybe you could say lots of things. Maybe it was a very good relationship. But when you think back at what couldn't I have said? Maybe you were worried about the therapist's health and you couldn't say that. Or maybe you were angry that the therapist was a minute late and you couldn't say that. Maybe you were hurt that the therapist remembered your birthday. Maybe you were jealous that your therapist went to a place that you wanted to go to and go to. Millions of things, right? Just give yourself a minute to see what might come to you about that. Just before you respond, Liz, let's do a show of hands of people that could think of something. There are a few people that couldn't think of anything, but let's give you another minute. Anything that you couldn't say, or that was really hard to say, or you couldn't even think it at the time. Sometimes it's like, oh, I realize now, you know, I was just going along with this, and this that the therapist was wanting. And I couldn't even think that. Okay, now let's have a few responses. Liz, we'll come back to you, but make it brief. Yes.
Everybody here except me could say sexual things about any kind of sexual desire that they might have for their therapist. Or nobody here has any history of a sexual feeling toward their, I feel like a pervert, right? There's so many things that I would be thinking. And Lynn, I found yours so innocent, your list.
Oh, well, I'm trying to get into it softly. I don't want to challenge the unformulated experience too suddenly. Why do you assume that nobody has that? I thought almost everybody raised their hand there of things that they couldn't say.
I totally projected everything onto everybody, I think. You're right.
And you could say it that you were projecting it onto them. Oh, I certainly had lots of sexual feelings and things and jealousies and all kinds of stuff, right? With my therapist, but I wouldn't say that I couldn't. Some of them I couldn't say, and some of them I could say, and my therapist was pretty good at helping me to be able to say some of those things. At one point, my therapist was trying to help me say something, a sexual fantasy, and giving me space to recapture it and put it into words, and I couldn't do it.
Mm.
But we were really right there, and I couldn't say it. And I thought that was in a way more helpful and more powerful than if I could say it. If I didn't even know that I felt it. There's something so I don't know, so dramatic about that. I just couldn't say it. And was very informative.
To say to my therapist, I know you don't like my wife, so I don't trust the way you're looking at the situation.
You couldn't say that.
I couldn't say that for the first year or so of my marriage, and then eventually I did say it. And I'm happy to say that she was quiet. She said, I'll think about it. And about 3 or 4 months later, she said, I've worked it through. Let's really talk about this.
Mm-hmm.
But it was excruciatingly hard to say, I know you don't like my wife, so I'm not going to talk about it because you're not without bias.
Mm-hmm. Right. So some of these instances that we're talking about, we knew, right? But there are all of this whole infinite realm that we never even thought, because couldn't emerge.
This is from our last class. It is the relational, FOT is the relational freedom to explore what is inhibiting the unformed experience from emerging.
Right. The freedom to explore. Without the freedom to explore it, when it's too threatening to the relationship in some kind of way, and of course that is all dependent on our history as well as the therapist's history, then we don't have the freedom to explore it. Well, let's keep this in mind through the week and let ourselves think about this occasionally, what we can't even let be conscious, what we can't allow to emerge in our relationships, and just what it would be like to write it down or to think it, what we would imagine it would be like to think. So I was giving you some categories of unformulated experience, and one of them being it's threatening to the relationship, to the bond. Another one is it's just completely a different universe. You can't think it with that person because it's not on their wavelength. You wouldn't know how to approach it, or that the other person would recognize it in any way. Another category of unformulated experience would be when the whole thinking process has stopped for that person or that group, that everything that's said is sort of already packaged, and it's precluded to say anything that's not in the packages. There are certain groups, social systems, that parties, meetings, where everything is just is going to this predictable thing, this predictable thing, this predictable. You can't even think the thing that's unpredictable. Sometimes you could rebel there, and that can enliven. So we always have to be really welcoming what is there that is challenging the predictable.